The lights in my barn flickered again, and my prize cow, Bessie, let out an irritated moo. It was the third time this week, and I was about 5 seconds away from taking a sledgehammer to my breaker box. Something was draining my electricity like a parasite, and if I didn't figure it out soon, I'd be out a lot more than just a few frustrated sighs. Then, just as I stepped out onto my porch, I saw it, an orange extension cord, snaking its way from my barn, across the fence, and straight into my neighbor's house. My jaw tightened. That was Karen's house. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, the woman who had spent the last 2 years harassing me about my unkempt lawn and unapproved farm animals, despite the fact that my property wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. She was the kind of woman who would take a ruler to measure your grass and issue a fine if it dared to be a millimeter too tall. And now she was stealing my electricity? I clenched my fist. Oh, she had no idea what she had just started. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Storming over and screaming at Karen wouldn't accomplish anything, except maybe earning me a trespassing complaint. No, I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof. So, I did what any self-respecting farmer with a grudge would do. I grabbed my hunting camera, set it up in the barn, and waited. The next morning, I nearly spit out my coffee when I checked the footage. There she was, in her overpriced yoga pants and ridiculous bedazzled live, laugh, love hoodie, sneaking onto my property in the dead of night, dragging her cursed extension cord across my land like a burglar with an electrical fetish. The audacity, the sheer, unfiltered nerve of this woman. And the best part? She had the gall to check her surroundings like some kind of master thief before plugging her cord in, completely oblivious to the camera recording her every move. My hands twitched with the urge to confront her right that second, but then a much better idea formed in my mind. She loved HOA rules so much? Fine. I'd give her the worst HOA nightmare of her life. But first, I needed to see just how much power she was stealing. I spent the rest of the day running tests, turning things on and off in my barn, and watching the meter. Sure enough, my readings spiked every time I turned off my own power, because Karen's house was still running strong. Her entire home, air conditioning, security lights, her obnoxious glowing flamingo lawn ornaments, was running on my farm's power. By the time the sun set, my plan was already coming together. It was simple, really. Karen believed in the almighty HOA, the bureaucratic overlords she worshipped like a religion. If I wanted to hit her where it hurt, I needed to play her game, but with my own rules. I spent the next few days crafting the most terrifying, official-looking HOA letter imaginable. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that unauthorized power consumption has been detected in your residence. Under the Farm Utility Homeowners Association, HOA, Guidelines, Section 12.5, Subsection B, all non-compliant electricity use is subject to immediate penalties. Current assessed fees, $10,000. Failure to remit payment within 14 days will result in additional penalties, including but not limited to power disconnection, lien placement on your property, legal action under the HOA Compliance Act. Please make immediate payment to the Farm Utility Homeowners Association to avoid further consequences. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Office. I sat back, grinning at my handiwork. It was perfect. Karen would take one look at this and absolutely lose her mind. To make it even more official, I had my buddy Tim, who used to work in a law office, format the document with all the proper legal nonsense. I even got a custom envelope printed with a big, bold, final notice stamp in red. The next morning, I watched from my porch as the delivery guy dropped it off at Karen's doorstep. She stepped outside in her usual Karen uniform, a gaudy floral robe, fuzzy slippers, and an expression of constant judgment. The second she saw the letter, her face scrunched up like she had just smelled rotten milk. I took a long sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Then it happened. Karen opened the letter. Her eyes darted across the page. Her face drained of color. Her jaw dropped. And then, just as I predicted, she let out a shriek so loud it sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees. I nearly choked on my coffee trying not to laugh. Karen scrambled inside, clutching the letter like it was a court summons. Within minutes, I heard the sound of furious typing. She was probably drafting an angry email to my fake HOA customer service. I leaned back in my chair, letting the satisfaction settle in. This was going to be fun. The moment Karen opened that letter, I knew I had her right where I wanted. From my porch, I watched as she stormed inside, clutching the paper like it was a lawsuit. The curtains in her living room twitched as she peeked out, probably scanning the neighborhood to see if anyone else had received a similar notice. It was almost too perfect. She had spent years terrorizing everyone with HOA rules and nonsense violations, but now the tables had turned. And she had no idea she was playing a game she could never win. I could only imagine what was going through her mind. Karen loved the HOA more than she loved her own family, probably. The idea that she had somehow violated a rule she didn't know existed must have been gnawing at her soul. She couldn't call the HOA to complain, because, as far as she knew, this was the HOA. She also couldn't just ignore it. Ignoring HOA notices was a sin in her book, punishable by extreme panic and frantic phone calls. Sure enough, within 10 minutes, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it ring. Karen didn't leave a voicemail, which meant she was either too panicked to think straight or already working on Plan B. I glanced back at her house and saw her pacing on her front lawn, phone in one hand, letter in the other, her expression a mixture of outrage and pure, unfiltered fear. She was unraveling, and it was a beautiful sight. A few hours passed before I saw the next phase of her meltdown. Her husband, Greg, a quiet man who usually tried his best to avoid the drama, had been dragged into the mess. I spotted him standing on the porch, reading the letter while Karen jabbered at him, her arms flailing wildly. Greg scratched his head, muttered something, and went back inside, clearly uninterested in fighting whatever imaginary HOA battle his wife was waging. Karen, however, was not one to back down. I heard the unmistakable sound of her printer running at full speed. Papers flew out as she printed whatever nonsense she thought would help her case. Then, like a soldier preparing for war, she gathered a group of fellow HOA devotees. Neighbors who, for some reason, still listened to her despite secretly hating her constant complaints. An hour later, a small army of middle-aged warriors stood at my gate. Karen was leading them, naturally, holding the letter high like a scroll of divine scripture. I stepped outside, leaning against my porch railing. "Afternoon, Karen," I said, playing dumb. "Something wrong?" Her face twisted in frustration. "Jake," she snapped, shoving the letter toward me. "Do you have any idea what this is?" I took my time pretending to read it, nodding along as if I had never seen it before. "Looks like a power bill," I said, scratching my chin. "Steep one, too." Karen's eye twitched. "This is an outrageous, completely fraudulent charge. This HOA doesn't even exist." I raised an eyebrow. "Of course it exists. It says so right there on the letter." Karen's loyal followers exchanged nervous glances. HOA rules were their Bible, and if Karen was losing faith in one, it put them in a very uncomfortable position. One of them, a lady named Patricia, shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, if it's an official notice." Karen whipped around, glaring at Patricia so hard the woman actually took a step back. "It's not official. It's a scam. Some idiot is trying to con me out of $10,000. I feigned concern. "That's awful, Karen. Really. But, just a thought, why did you get this notice in the first place?" Karen stiffened. "I don't know." I smiled. "Didn't plug into someone else's electricity, did you?" The color drained from her face for just a moment before she recovered, puffing herself up like an angry peacock. "That is a ridiculous accusation. I would never." Before she could finish, I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen. The hidden camera footage played, showing her sneaking onto my farm, plugging in that ridiculous extension cord, and scurrying back to her house like a raccoon caught in a garbage can. The silence that followed was magical. Karen's mouth opened and closed, her brain desperately trying to come up with an excuse. Her loyal followers slowly backed away, pretending they suddenly had urgent business elsewhere. I sighed dramatically. Look, Karen, I'd hate to escalate things. But this. I gestured toward the letter. This is serious business. You might want to just pay the bill and move on. Karen's nostrils flared. I am not paying a fake power bill. I shrugged. Then I guess HOA will have no choice but to take action. She stomped her foot. There is no HOA. Funny, I said, pulling out another piece of paper. Because I just received confirmation from the HOA compliance office. I handed her the official audit report, which was nothing more than a printed-out spreadsheet with a few made-up numbers. Says here your house has been drawing more power than any other in the neighborhood. That's a serious violation. Karen made a sound somewhere between a growl and a scream. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I knew this wasn't over. Karen never accepted defeat, no matter how obviously wrong she was. She'd fight this, try to find some loophole or ridiculous excuse. But I had one final move left, and it was going to push her right over the edge. I picked up my phone and made a call. Hey Tim. You still got that suit and clipboard? Tim laughed on the other end. Oh, this is gonna be good. Damn right, I said. Time to send in the inspector. The next morning, I sat on my porch with my coffee, waiting for the final act of this masterpiece to unfold. Karen had gone radio silent after our last conversation, which meant she was either plotting a counterattack or trying to erase any evidence of her little power heist. Either way, she had no idea what was coming next. Right on schedule, Tim arrived in his finest disguise, a cheap suit, clipboard in hand, and an expression of absolute authority. He had worked in a law office before, but he could have been an actor with the way he carried himself. With his hair slicked back and his glasses perched on the edge of his nose, he looked every bit the official inspector he was pretending to be. I gave him a quick nod, and he marched straight toward Karen's house with the kind of confidence that made people nervous. He didn't even knock. He just rang the doorbell 3 times, like he had better things to do than wait. From my porch, I could hear Karen shuffling inside. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and there she stood, still in her robe, looking far less aggressive than usual. The power bill had clearly rattled her, and now she was face to face with what she thought was an actual inspector. Tim cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Good morning, ma'am. I'm here to conduct an official compliance review regarding unauthorized power usage under the Farm Utility Homeowners Association. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She blinked a few times. The what? Tim sighed like he had explained this 100 times already. Farm Utility Homeowners Association. HOA. You should have received a notice. Karen clutched the letter she had been waving around yesterday, holding it out like it was a shield. This is a scam. I don't owe anyone $10,000. Tim flipped through his clipboard, nodding like he was reading something important. Well, ma'am, according to our records, your property has been consuming an unauthorized amount of electricity. That places you in violation of subsection B, Article 12, which, as you know, carries significant penalties. Karen's face turned red. That's ridiculous. I don't even. She stopped, realizing that denying it would be pointless. She had already seen the video. This is harassment. I'll sue. Tim didn't even blink. Ma'am, you are, of course, free to pursue legal action, but given that you've already been documented in noncompliance, I'd strongly advise against it. The penalties for power theft are steep. Karen let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a gasp. I didn't steal anything. Tim clicked his pen and wrote something on his clipboard. Noted. Karen grabbed the edge of her doorframe like she needed it to stay upright. You can't just show up here and threaten me. I have rights. Tim nodded. Absolutely. But we also have an obligation to ensure compliance. At this point, we have no choice but to escalate the matter. Karen's expression flickered with something close to fear. Escalate how? Tim flipped to a new page on his clipboard. If payment is not received within 72 hours, your property will be subject to immediate power disconnection. Following that, a lien may be placed on your home for the outstanding balance. Karen's face drained of color. You can't cut off my power. Tim glanced at her front yard, where her ridiculous pink flamingo lawn ornaments stood like sentries. I see you have decorative lighting. Those will, of course, also be affected. Karen looked like she might actually pass out. This is insane. Tim scribbled something again, nodding. So, just to clarify, you're refusing to pay? Karen sputtered, flailing her arms. I'm not paying for something that isn't real. Tim pursed his lips. Well, in that case. He pulled a bright orange notice from his clipboard and slapped it against her door. Karen yelped like he had just thrown a bucket of ice water on her. What is that? Official disconnection notice, Tim said, completely deadpan. You'll want to make arrangements before the deadline. Karen snatched the paper off her door, scanning it with wide eyes. I could only imagine what was going through her mind. She probably thought her entire house was about to go dark. Then, as if on cue, she turned and bolted inside. Tim walked back toward me, keeping his expression professional until he was out of Karen's view. The second he stepped onto my porch, he grinned. She's losing it. I laughed, shaking my head. That was a damn fine performance. Tim took a sip from the beer I handed him, glancing back at Karen's house. You think she'll actually pay? Not a chance, I said. But that's not the point. The real electric company showed up 2 days later, but not for me. Apparently, Karen had tried to call them in a last-ditch effort to prove the power bill was fake. Instead, they ended up doing an inspection of their own, one that revealed a whole list of violations from Karen's tampering with the lines. That's when things really fell apart for her. The fines weren't $10,000. They were $25,000. The electric company wasn't messing around. Illegal modifications, power theft, safety hazards, she had racked up a serious bill. I sat on my porch as she screamed at the technician, flailing her arms in the air while her husband stood behind her, looking like he wanted to disappear. Greg tried to reason with her. Karen, you did this to yourself. Karen turned on him like a wild animal. You're supposed to be on my side. Greg threw his hands up. I told you not to plug into the farm. Karen ignored him, turning back to the technician. There has to be something you can do. The tech shook his head. Ma'am, this is an official violation. There's nothing I can do. You're lucky the state isn't pressing criminal charges. Karen made a strangled noise and stomped her foot so hard her slipper flew off. The best part was when she stormed inside and slammed the door so hard one of her flamingos tipped over. Greg, meanwhile, just stood there for a moment before shaking his head and walking off in the opposite direction. A week later, the HOA held a meeting. Karen, still fuming from her public humiliation, tried to get them to help with her fines. They refused. Apparently, even they were tired of her antics. By the end of the month, she had stepped down as HOA president, citing personal reasons. I never got my $10,000, but I did get the best entertainment I'd ever seen. And to top it all off, I put up a brand new sign in my barn. Headquarters of the Farm Utility Homeowners Association. Just in case Karen ever got any more ideas.